Hello, everyone. Let's give a hand to Michèle Stephenson and Joe Brewster, the filmmakers of Going to Mars, the Nikki Giovanni project. I told you it was going to be a fabulous time. Michèle, I loved something you said when you introduced the film and you talked about. It's working, right?
Yes, it's
It's
working.
working. You want to say something
I
before I
hope
ask
you
my
don't.
question?
I hope you don't ask us very difficult questions. We had a glass of wine
All
right
right.
before
I'm,
you.
I'm going to try to go easy on you. You said something that I loved about emotions and the emotion that this film is going to stir in this audience. So I want to ask you about the emotions that Nikki Giovanni's art stirred in you and wanted you to make this film.
Hmm. You haven't spoken yet, so
Okay, let me try to say something intelligent. You know what? The emotion that stirs me is when I see an audience like this, and I'm just so grateful that you're here, able to share our art. And this is what we like to do. We like to create something which we created for us. What was your question again?
Nikki Giovanni's art and what it stirred in you that made you want to make this film.
Well, I would say that it was not Nikki Giovanni that wanted to make us to make the film. It was really the desire to expand our skill set and craft and do something that was not observational and still evoke the same kind of emotion. We tried that with music, and we tried for a few years to find a great musician, and we weren't able to do that. And then we happened upon an NPR broadcast of Nikki, and I remembered what it was like to hear her for the first time in Los Angeles, where she was talking about. It was the same poem that we ended the film, ego tripping, and the sense of wonder and pride that was evoked as a young teen. And I thought we can work with that.
Mm.
But Michèle comes at it from a different lens, a Montreal lens.
well, I mean, my first encounter with her work was in college, right? Because I had not studied her, but it was a moment of sort of self-discovery of her, the work of Ntosoka Shange, reading the autobiography of Angela Davis. All of that was sort of stirring for me in those, late teens, early 20s. And it sort of has stuck with me in terms of this idea of looking at this world differently, but also, centering our power and strength. And her unapologetic way of being in the world was really sort of a North Star for me, even though I didn't agree with everything. But it's more about the way and being in tune with who you are, and not necessarily agreeing with all the decisions, but really sort of being in awe at the ability to speak truth to power.
Yeah. Well, I think if you agreed with her and everything, we wouldn't have this amazing movie. So this is kind of what I want to ask you about. So you're a couple. You work together as filmmakers. You don't agree with Nikki all the time. I'm sure you and Joe don't agree all the time. So can you tell us about? Can you tell us about working together, especially on this project, which is from your previous answer, it meant different things
Yeah.
to you. So can you both talk about that?
Yeah, it's it's kind of like I'm thinking about sort of because sometimes you process things. Sometimes you can't process things intellectually and express how collaboration happens. It's really kind of strange. I mean, we've been together for a long time, but I've come to the realization that in this particular film, and what we've been trying to explore is sort of this black diasporic expression that's sort of been sort of, theorized as Black Atlantic. And this idea of call and response and this idea of working in a collectivity where where the individual expression is sort of listened to, but then there is a response to it and a coming together of something greater, right? So I think there's a bit of that in the actual practice in terms of, sometimes he'll take the light and I'll say, okay, all right, I can kind of work with that. Sometimes I can't, and then we come to something that I think, but it comes, I think, from a place of respect and love. So the disagreement, I think about the conversation between Nikki and James Baldwin, right? Where, interestingly, we see some of the misogyny and some of the patriarchal internalization that James Baldwin expresses and her response to it. So there's sort of this engagement with each other that comes from respect and love, that hopefully they're influencing each other in a way that that they both become better people, I guess. And so I guess that's how, we sort of practice that, try to. But you want to add anything to that?
No, that's pretty well said. Well, for those that don't know, it's like when you're growing up in LA, you play these games, someone gets in the center, and you do your thing. And she does her thing. And then you look at it and say, okay, that ain't working. But you get your chance to get in the center. And that's the editor's process, our process with editors. That's the process with the creative team. And that's the process, if you've seen American Promise, us raise our kids in Brooklyn. And it's working so far. And so let's see with the next film.
Yes. I don't want to bogart the conversation, so I want to see if there are questions from you. I could ask you so many things, but let's see. Is there any question? Yes, right there.
I can see you, but I can't hear you.
Okay, I'll be loud. That was so beautiful. Thank you so much. I guess I'm wondering, how did you come up? What was the process of coming up with the visual language for the film, with so many different components, like the archival, and then we had shots of the galaxies, and space travel, and Nikki herself, past and present. So I'm wondering what that process was like working with an editor and just like the balance.
Sure. Well, that question is unanswerable. No, in the time that we have left, but let me say, we were intentional about working with multiple planes of information. We started with archival, verite, animation. Thank God we dropped that. We discovered that she was a stand-up comedian with a very high degree of skill level in terms of standing up in front of the audience and creating this comedic, dramatic arc. So we were working with at least four levels, and we were lost as to how to start. So we started with verite. We created very strong, emotionally resonant scenes with the verite. And then we began to lay that down as foundation one. We told a story with that. And we told a story with the performance. And then we began to figure out how to have every level talk to each other. Not just repeat what was said. But Baldwin does more than just repeat what she says. There's some questioning, and sometimes some cynical questioning of what was said in the previous section. And that's where the time, we required a lot of time to develop. We went through, 4 editors? We love our editors, but sometimes they didn't do what we wanted them to do. And in COVID, they were on a next job, and what we found is we let them leave, and they came back, and they began to work with the other editors. Remember that circle where you get in and you do your thing? Editors, let me tell you this: if you're editing with someone, get the code to the frame IO, because they're still looking at the cut. And they would call in and say, okay, that cut is not working here. Let me get involved, and let's work this on a different level. And that was the magic of making all of these talks. Is that the cue to go? Okay. All right.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that, it was the result of a lot of experimentation over the years, but also the gaps. Well, the two things I would add: the gaps between the times when we were not editing, stuff was happening in our heads. And we were in conversation about ways of layering, working with associate editors to do some, sort of rough drafts of certain concepts we were having, specifically also around the going to Mars stanzas that we ended up using that ultimately, was what became sort of part of the structure, the scaffolding of the film. But ultimately, also, we're very intentional about, we didn't want the archive to be illustrative. It had to be in conversation with the poetry. It had to be this call and response. So what you're seeing sometimes is, in some cases, new archive that's been rarely seen, but there's also a reinterpretation of archives that we have a collective knowledge of. But then it's like, oh, okay, it's a different emotional sort of note that we're hitting with that. So, yeah.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Alma. Thank you so much for your work. One, I just really appreciate the element of fire that I saw in the film. I appreciate seeing the cherry blossoms at the beginning and at the end, and garlic and echinacea are in her garden, and those are like fire element plants. Fire from the ship, fire from there's a lot of fire, and I think about Nikki Giovanni as fire too. So that really spoke to me. And on that, I was just curious about Nikki's relationship to the edit, like how involved was Nikki in watching the cuts, and how was your relationship with her input in the film?
Nikki had no relationship to the cut at all. She had a relationship to saying no as to what we were going to have access to or not. And so those limitations, what I really am grateful for, because we're working with other sort of folks these days, other collaborators, participants that are sometimes not as direct, but definitely have boundaries. But we have to figure out the boundaries and maybe spend some money before we realize that those boundaries exist. She was very kind of direct about that, and that really actually helped us creatively. So she had no input in the edit. In fact, she was very encouraging of us to explore our own artistry with the film, with the understanding that these sort of boundaries existed from her perspective in terms of what she was going to tell.
She was reluctant to look at early cuts. In fact, I'd say 2 or 3 times. She says, "Baby, you need to do you." And so we knew that we were kind of on our own, but that's really not on our own. She's into the creative process. She was encouraging us to take risks, and that's really what we wanted to do. We really wanted to make something different, and we tried our best, and this is what we got.
All right. I have time for one more. Yes, back there.
It's not really a question so much as a comment of appreciation that I think ties into what Joe was just saying. That I loved that nothing ever felt like a flashback. But that you moved really seamlessly through time. It was so poetic and so beautiful. And I don't think I've ever seen a film that did it quite in that way. So I really appreciated that, and I just wanted to say.
Well,
So maybe you can talk about the rhythm of the film.
Well, let me take one more question. Let me just say this: this film won the editing award here. We think it should have won more, but but I think editing doesn't really describe what this is. So like even for the editors to do this work, someone had to come up with the notion and the freedom. Because there's pressure to make a documentary and illustrate what was just said. And we put so much pressure on the editors just to do the opposite. We had bins of opposites. So that means that, like, if she says it's blue, we show, red. and we had bins to do that because we really want to make a statement. That's the reversal footage, and part of that statement is that for you as audience to dream. Those are dream moments where you basically are not forced to think about what she says, but maybe the antithesis of what she said. And that was intentional.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that, and thank you, because we were very intentional about the notion of collapsing time. It has to do with space travel also, and there's all of these other elements that are emotional that are not intellectual. And this collapse of time has a power in itself in terms of where it reaches us. And the idea that her words at 28 are as relevant to us today as her words, today, and that, there's almost like this timelessness of it. So that was very intentional also in the process.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. Michèle, Joe, thank you so much for Going
Thank
to
you.
Mars to Doc NYC. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Have a wonderful evening.